Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, Bruchim Abaim, let us bless, even though we're not necessarily specifically studying scripture today, it makes sense for us to engage in a blessing over Torah, la sok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav b'tzivanu, ba'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign over time and space, makes us holy with commandments, commands us to engage in the study of Torah. So today we're going to talk about Pesach. Heard about it? We enter into a beautiful and yet very different Passover season, different in terms of how we're going to engage in it. I suppose, unfortunately, the values for which we fight because of our Passover experience, a better world, a more healed world, people who are treated better, people who are more free. This is an effort that remains no matter how we engage in our Passover celebration today. And so I thought we would reflect on Passover according to the Jewish way, which is one of the most phenomenal collections of wisdom about the Jewish holidays that I know of. Other than maybe the Tanakh, it may in fact be the most important book in my library, certainly among the most important. And it's written by Yitz Greenberg, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, you can see him here.
Yes.
You see him on my screen. Can you see my my little cursor here, circling around Rabbi Greenberg, also known as Yitz Greenberg? He is a contemporary scholar. He's a modern Orthodox rabbi. And one of his wonderful, most powerful influences on the value of Klal Yisrael, which is a notion that we as a Jewish people, no matter how we engage as Jews, are bonded by our Judaism. Something really powerful about being part of the Jewish people. In many ways, Passover not only celebrates freedom, but it celebrates our freedom as a Jewish people, ultimately to be a force for good in the world and to make the world a better place and to bring healing to the world. And that is a responsibility no matter what stripe of Judaism you find yourself a part of. So we will be studying as a way of understanding Jewish holidays. We'll be studying Rabbi Greenberg's book. In fact, I would recommend after this call, if you would like, I would recommend that you get his book. You can download it onto a Kindle, or you can order it if you'd like. Anyway, I'm pleased to see everybody here. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a second. And theoretically, I'd love to go around the room. Hello, Randy. Nice to see you. And let's see, who else did we just bring in here? Lee, nice to see you as well. Welcome. Hopefully everybody can hear okay. Okay, now I'm going to share a different screen. No, that's not what we want. Let's go here. No, we don't want that. Let's see if we can do this.
How do we do that? Do you want us to take off the microphone for us?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to mute you now.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
All right. For myself. Okay. It's not. Did I get everybody there?
Ours is still live.
All right, hang on. You can mute yourselves, actually.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for where.
Go
Options.
to participants. There. Oh, all right. Hang on. Marcia, hello, how are you?
Fine, Rabbi Craig. I called to wish you and all your loved ones a very healthy
You're very
and
kind.
Passover.
You're very kind. So would you like to join our class? Because I'm in the middle of teaching. I'm pleased to receive your message.
Oh my God!
So
yes,
I'm going to mute.
Of course, I'd like to.
With
join
apologies,
your
I'm going to mute you so you can just listen, okay?
class. Okay.
All right, there you go. Perfect. Always have room for more. All right, is everybody properly muted? I'm gonna leave some of you up to your own to mute yourselves because you're not muted yet. All right, so the Jewish way, living the Jewish holidays, and we're gonna focus on. All right, can everybody see my screen? Give me a thumbs up. All right. So Passover probably needs no introduction on some levels. According to Rabbi Greenberg, Judaism is an Exodus religion. So before we jump into what that means, I want you in the chat box. Can you see the chat box? I want you to, if you have a thought about what it means that Passover is an Exodus, or Judaism is an Exodus religion, what does that mean to you? All right, do you see, raise your hand if you see the chat box somewhere on your, okay. So just jot down an idea in the chat box. Let me know what you're thinking. What does it mean when we say Judaism is an Exodus religion? It's okay if you have to guess. This is part of our Judaism 101 series. Does not assume you have any previous knowledge. So if you can find the chat box, then offer an idea. All right. So Ben says that Israel is still in exile or galut. Okay. Our faith is defined by the journey from slavery to freedom. We are always strangers and have a duty to other strangers seeking freedom and liberation. Beautiful. Beautiful. Our understanding as a people comes into view really when God enters into our history, hears the cries of our ancestors, enters into that space of slavery, and in partnership with Moses and the people themselves, creates a liberation from slavery to freedom. And it's in that transition from slavery to freedom, in that transition from a world that is not nearly what it ought to be, to a world that is more like what it should be. Our responsibility as Jews, ultimately, with the freedom, is to live according to Jewish principles.
Rabbi, I can't hear anything.
Okay, there you go.
Okay.
So the idea is that our commitments as Jews to a world that is not quite what it should be are driven by the memories of this Exodus, but not only the memories, but the realities that a world isn't what it should be, just like it wasn't what it should be all the way back when we were enslaved. And so our responsibility going forward is to remember that we were strangers in the land of Egypt and to use our freedom to fulfill commandments, and with those commandments, to make a difference in the world. So let us jump right into some reading. Now, what I would suggest is that I'm going to call for volunteer to read out loud. and we're going to try to make it through these slides and understand what Rabbi Greenberg is teaching, and we'll try to offer my own commentary as well. So let's start off with Cantor Friedman. Could you read this first slide, Seeking the World as It Should Be? Unmute yourself, please.
Rabbi, I see the slide for Yitz, but I don't see the next slide.
Really interesting. How many people see the text here? Nobody. You just see Rabbi Greenberg. Wow. What if I do that? No?
Rabbi, try unsharing your screen and resharing it. I think the video feed has been interrupted.
Got it. What do you see now? Do you see the text?
That's done it.
All right. You'll forgive that where it says click to add title. This point, I'm not going to worry about that. Cantor, please. Oh, there we go. Do you see that now?
Jewish holidays.
Seeking the world as it should be.
Don't see that yet, Rabbi.
Oh my goodness. Okay. What if I do that?
We saw the title page.
All right. What about this? What does it say?
Nothing yet, but I think it's coming.
You saw the title page, yeah?
Yep.
We did, but we just
Right.
says it just says that you've started screen sharing, but we don't see anything just yet. I know. This
Okay.
stuff is tricky.
What if I do that? Sharing is paused. Oh, that's why. Bring your shared window to the front. Resume share. Okay. We'll get this, promise. Okay. What if I do that? Now what?
Na 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 na.
Now we see a slide that says Seeking the World as It Should Be.
Thank God for small mercies. All right, Shelley, please.
My pleasure. Let me move this box so I can see it. Oh, geez, nice box. Okay. Judaism insists that history and the social, economic, I don't see the P word there. Could someone tell me what that P word says? For some reason, I have a box of
We
pictures.
can't see it either.
Okay. Well, there's a P word, reality, in which people live will eventually be perfected. Much of what passes for the norm of human existence is really a deviation from the ultimate reality.
All right, so our world is not what it should be, but our effort as a Jewish people is to work towards a world as it should be. So that means the world can be perfected. That means that our existence is what Rabbi Greenberg calls a deviation from the ultimate reality in which everybody's free, whether socially, economically, politically. There's no work needed to free the captives. There's no poverty. There's no violence. There's no illness, right? We're living a world right now in COVID-19, and we don't have to be reminded that is remarkably unlike a perfect world. So Passover is really ultimately an opportunity for us to think about how we're going to change the world that we live in to the world that we want to live in. All right, let's keep moving forward. Do you see that slide? We shall overcome.
No.
Rabbi, I think that you're going to have to unshare your screen and reshare your screen each time you advance the slide.
Really?
For this meeting, that's what it seems like. Yes.
Okay. Fine. So let's do this. Stop share. Share. You see that? We shall overcome.
Yes.
Yay.
Yay.
Ted May, we shall overcome.
We shall overcome. How do we know this? From an actual event in history, the Exodus, marked the paradox, the very idea that much of history, present reality itself, is a deviation from the ideal, and that redemption will overcome this divergence comes from a historic experience. That experience was the liberation of the Hebrew slaves, the Exodus from Egypt.
So why is this precedent important? Put it in the chat box. I think that might be the easiest way for us to operate here. And then somebody be kind enough to read the chat box, maybe Cassandra or Shelley. We have a historic precedent. It's called the Exodus, Yetziat Mitzrayim. That there is a better world and that we're moving toward it and that we can move toward it because why? Why don't you read those out loud?
I'm happy to.
Yes.
One lady says, which is me, because it illustrates God's love for us.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Because it illustrates what?
God's love for us.
God's love for us.
Okay.
That's pretty.
And Ted May, the Exodus presents both a promise and a model for reaching for freedom.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. That there's hope that we can make the world a better place because guess what? We've done it before. We've made it better by virtue of escaping Egypt, becoming free, receiving the commandments at Sinai, and going off into the world as a force for good to make things better. This came as an actual event in history. It's real. It's true. All right, let's...
More comments? Because we know we can overcome the seemingly insurmountable. From Cassandra and from Stephen, Exodus represents that we're always seeking.
Indeed. Indeed. Always seeking. This job, unfortunately, is never over. This job, fortunately, gives us something to do to really make our lives worthwhile, to make our lives matter, to make the world around us better. All right, let's stop share. I know this is cumbersome, but stay with me. We will figure out what to do here. All right, so, okay, let's go here. Share. Why is slavery so problematic? Let's see. Nancy, would you read for us, please? Do you see that? Unmute.
Okay. Why is slavery so problematic? Oppression and, hold on, I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. Here I am. Oppression and deprivation are not that dissimilar. The most devastating effect of slavery, ultimately, is that the slave internalizes the master's values and accepts the condition of slavery as his proper status. People who live in chronic conditions of poverty, hunger, and sickness tend to show similar patterns of acceptance and passivity. As with slaves, their deprivation derives from their political and economic status and then becomes moral and psychological reality. It is this reality that was overthrown in the Exodus.
Yes, it was overthrown, and yet it was a constant effort by our ancestors, one that we continue constantly to try and overthrow. Yes, the Exodus was successful in that our ancestors left Egypt. They went to Sinai, they received the commandments, they went on to live thousands and thousands of years beyond that moment, living out Torah, bringing the light of Torah and the healing of Torah to the world. And yet, they're still people who are enslaved. They are trafficked by people who do not have strong moral direction. And so we're still in that fight. And by the way, we have empathy as a people about what it's like to assume these patterns of oppression and deprivation, right? This is not just a political or economic situation. It is a moral and psychological situation. How do we know, by the way, that the Israelites struggled with freedom? Because they didn't always know how to be free. Some of our ancestors wanted to go back to Egypt because they knew that reality. Sort of the devil they knew was better than the uncertainty they didn't know in the desert. They kind of got stuck in their ways. What are some of the chats? What's going on in the chat box?
So I had just commented in response to your question, Rabbi, which I now think was probably rhetorical, that we see a lot in the Tanakh, stories of like the golden calf, where we directly see the Israelites reverting to pagan ways, but then also like if you go into the Psalms, you see mention of Israelites who have forgotten God and are worshiping false idols or whatever. So obviously this is a recurring problem.
Yes. The lessons of freedom aren't learned one time and that's it. This should stand to reason, right? Because we observe Passover every year. And there are any number of ways that we remind ourselves of Yetziat Mitzrayim, which we'll see in a moment. A list of various ways in which we remember that we were slaves in the land of Egypt, not just during Passover, but daily through ritual and through daily and weekly prayer and so on. All right, so let's stop share again and let's move the slide. Okay.
While you're doing that, some lovely comments just came in.
Yes, please.
One from Ben saying we must work to overthrow this conditioning. And Ted May said 40 years in the desert is a metaphor for the difficulty of the transition. Even when free, they were not yet, oops, there it went when we shared the screen. Sorry about that, it went away. Even when we are free, we were not yet free. And Nancy said, I just started reading The Warmth of Other Suns. And one concept that stuck with me is that slaves and slave owners were both slaves to their point of view. Similar patterns of acceptance and passivity. I really like that.
Good points. It's normal. It's normal. We get stuck in our way. It's hard to change, even if it's for the better. By the way, I think anybody who is making successful strides in sobriety knows that addiction can be something that continues to enslave even beyond sobriety, even once sobriety is achieved, because once an addict, always an addict. And so there's always an effort that's required to make sure that the liberation from the addiction is sustainable over time. And that requires not only an effort, but a recognition that, easily those chains can return. Was there new thoughts in the chat box? Shelley, do me a favor. Every time there's new stuff in the chat box, we'll pause and reflect out loud.
Not a worry. Let me just make sure there's nothing. I'm sorry.
Stephen Melamed has shared with us that the word quarantine is based on the number 40.
Isn't that interesting?
It's interesting.
What do we make of that, Steve? You can unmute and just tell us out loud if you'd like.
Well, I think the word in the ancient world was derived from all these references from 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. It's also the reference, like the 40 days in Christianity leading up to Easter. So there's lots of references, and somehow that word evolved, that there was something tied to this notion of 40 as kind of being transformative.
Transformative. It's like a period, in this case, a period of time in which change can settle in. 40 years
Yeah.
to work out that slave mentality. I would add, interestingly, that even at the end of that 40-year period, as the children of Israel stood on the precipice of the Holy Land, the Promised Land, we know that Moses, a central character other than God and Pharaoh in our Passover story, doesn't even get into the Holy Land. And the generation of leadership has to change over as they move into the new space, as they leave quarantine, if you will. Requires a whole new level of leadership and engagement, which is to suggest to me that there was a sufficient amount of enslavement still in their hearts, that they needed to feel, maybe a group of individuals freer could go in. Now, that's being said, and the fact that we continue to celebrate and observe our freedom story seems to suggest maybe that we never fully get over it. Because, as long as there are people who are not free, we're not fully free, even if we feel pretty free. It's an interesting argument as to whether or not people should have been completely eliminated. The opportunity to go into the Promised Land should have been completely eliminated for someone like Moses. When we're still trying to fight that fight, and feel like maybe we're not actually in exile. Maybe we're feeling like we're in a redeemed place. The United States feels redemptive in many ways, but not in all ways, right? It's a wonderful place, but it's not always a wonderful place. There is freedom for sure, but there are people who are still struggling to be free. So we're never fully over that slave mentality, never fully disconnected or liberated from the oppression or the deprivation. And yet, we continue to work on the power of liberation and freedom and redemption through the Passover experience, because human beings are meant to be free. Somebody read this. Do you see it?
May I read it?
Did we read that already?
No,
May I
we
read it? This is Rosalind.
Rosalind, please.
Human beings are meant to be free. The feeling of the slaves testified that human beings are meant to be free. History will not be finished until all are free. The Exodus shows that God is independent of human control. Once this is understood by tyrants and their victims, then all human power is made relative. Freedom is the inexorable outcome. For only God's absolute power can be morally legitimate.
So we know in the Passover story, prior to it, the early part of it, and I know this to be true because guess what? I watched Prince of Egypt last night. And there's this moment where, the priests are showing off all their magic tricks to show how powerful their God is. And Moses is trying to channel God's magic. And one of the things that becomes clear, especially after the last plague, the last of the 10 plagues, is what? That God proves to Pharaoh that God is independent of human control. And it's only when Pharaoh reluctantly and stubbornly recognizes this reality that he says, okay, Moses, you can take your people and you can leave. The revolution here from our ancestral point of view is that freedom ultimately is a product of God's undefeatable power, right? Gives it a moral legitimacy, makes it absolutely clear to Moses as the leader of the Jewish people that he must take his people into freedom. And so he persists, despite his reservations, in confronting Pharaoh and convincing Pharaoh to let them go. And God's true power through the affect of the plagues allows for the change to take place. All right. Anything in the chat box? All right. So let us try something else here. Okay. Here we go. Setting our people apart as moral exemplars. Let's see. Ben, will you read that, please?
Sure. The initial impact of the redemption experience was set the Jewish people apart. A case in point, because you are outsiders in the land of Egypt, Jews were instructed to treat the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the landless, those who are vulnerable and marginal in every society with compassion, generosity, and love. Yet the redemption experience does not blot out reality. The Bible itself describes at some length how the liberated Jewish slaves carried the moral scars, the dependence, and the despair of slave status with them into freedom.
All right. So we talked a little bit about the baggage that we have carried throughout our history. Our ancestors carried it. We carried it in our own way. And yet, what's the prevailing responsibility? Despite the baggage, we're not going back to Egypt. I know it's tempting. I know we sometimes trip ourselves on the way towards freedom. But what ultimately is our responsibility? Ted, you brought it to bear earlier. Ultimately, we as strangers in the land of Egypt, as slaves in the land of Egypt, once freed, have the responsibility as moral exemplars, as moral agents. It's incumbent upon us to use our freedom to support the vulnerable in society, the widows, the orphans, the poor, the landless, those who are vulnerable, those who are marginalized, those who are excluded. Our glorious responsibility day in and day out is to recognize that until we all contribute to this moral example. And by the way, I'm not even thinking just about Jews. I'm thinking about all human beings. Until we are all committed to the same effort, we will be tempted by the moral scars and the lingering despair. And that will affect the nature of our freedom. So we sit at our Seder in however way we're going to do that, right? Within our own homes, online, maybe watching a video of one later, participating in this conversation. We're going to figure out what it means to rededicate ourselves as moral exemplars. What do we have in the chat box here?
Nothing right now, Rabbi.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I lied. Ben just came up with something. He said, so we are expected to be I don't think it says or logo. Autocorrect says or logo, but I think he means or legoyim,
Right.
a light to the nations.
We're talking about being a light into the nations. Yes, Ben. Okay, let's stop share there. And let's go to the next slide. We're just kind of moving right along here. And so here's something you've heard of before. Let me share my screen. Partnership with God. Let's see. Walter, Loretta, can you read for us?
Okay. Our partnership with God. I just want to say there is a box with a photo in it of someone always hiding some of the print to the far upper right of the writing, but I'll do the best I can. And it's there for every card.
You can move the pictures of people down to the bottom of your screen if you just click and drag, and that way it won't block.
Yeah, that's your own screen, I think.
He's trying to do it. He's trying to move it. Go ahead. All right. Our partnership with God. It says, do you want to leave the meeting? No. Okay. No, the Exodus did not destroy evil in the world. What it did was set up an alternative conception of life. Were it not for the Exodus, humans would have reconciled themselves to the evils that exist in the world. The Exodus reestablishes the dream of perfection and thereby creates the tension that must exist until reality is redeemed. The Exodus model implies that a partnership between God and humanity will carry out the transformation of the world.
Right. So not only are we each individually freed by the Exodus, but the Exodus summons a collaboration, a partnership between us and the Holy One of Blessing, and between us and one another as free people. And in this collaboration, we can expect to transform the world as it should be, to the world as it is, to the world as it should be. Let me repeat that. Understanding that we are in partnership or collaboration with the Holy One of Blessing and with one another enables us to transform the world from as it is, a world in which evil is not fully destroyed, into the world as it should be, a world in which evil is destroyed and freedom is granted and achieved for all. We have work to do. The Exodus gives us the confidence. Not only does it give us hope and faith in the dream of perfection, it reminds us that historically we've been through it before. Didn't perfect the world, but it gave us a chance to be in position to do the work to make the world more whole, to give us the energy, the confidence, the moxie, the chutzpah to continue until we get the work done. And God's there to help us. All right, let me see if I can do this. What happens if... Hang on. Do you see the slide change?
Mm-hmm.
What does it say now?
What must?
Oh, brilliant. Shelley, read the question, please.
What must our partnership with God look like in the age of COVID-19?
All right, so this is a chance for us to really kind of hone in on our individual reality. Let's put some answers in the chat box. If you can't put in the chat box, you can say it out loud.
Stephen Malamed says, is it possible for evil to ever really be destroyed, as seeing evil lives within people?
Yeah, I think that what we're talking about here is a world where evil exists, and that's just the way it is. We're not in the Garden of Eden. As long as people can make free choices, some will make choices that have evil laden within them. infused within them and will contribute to ongoing evil. That said, we always have a chance to change our choices. So I think that we could conceivably, if we all collaborated in choosing to live a good life, a life that matters, that means something, we could bring more healing and wholeness to the world and potentially eliminate evil.
Ted May says in response to the question about what God looks like in the age of COVID-19, we must be close to God, but no closer than 6 feet.
Ah, right.
When we help
That's fun. What else?
Ben says we must help each other even when it's difficult. And Cassandra says, our tradition also tells us that the impulse to do evil is also what spurs us to be productive. We must work against our evil impulses.
Interesting. Sometimes our fuller humanity, even the parts that are problematic, like our capacity for evil, sometimes give us a chance to understand what's going to take for us to be good. Create a distinction between what it means to be good, and it might motivate us as if we were just only good and we never knew what it's like to make a mistake or, say nary a crossword. We might not know. So I don't know if that gives evil utilitarian value in our lives. We know that evil exists. We know that our responsibility is to minimize it.
Quincy writes about the question at hand, even if only self-quarantining as an act of good. So self-quarantining in itself is an act of goodness.
Okay. I would say, for the most part, our partnership with God, whether it's the age of COVID-19 or it's the age of nationalistic fervor that causes nations to create irreparable harm to our people, like during World War II, or it is the exodus from Egypt and the slavery that preceded that exodus. I think our partnership with God looks more or less the same. It's about understanding there are people who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, who are excluded. There are people who are poor. There are people who are lonely. And it is incumbent upon us to do our part with whatever effective technologies, whether we're in quarantine or not in quarantine, to reach out and do our part to draw people into a world that is made more whole, into a world that pays more attention to what it means to heal itself.
Stephen just shared, this pandemic presents yet another opportunity for people to realize that one does not win if someone else loses.
Right.
It is not a zero-sum relationship.
That's right. We are not fully free until everybody's free. Free from trafficking, free from addiction, free from loneliness, free from poverty, free from hatred, free from racism, free from misogyny, free from domestic abuse.
One of the things we talked about last night, Rabbi, is that COVID is not the only plague currently. All the things you listed were plagues that have existed that we were not noticing around us as clearly. And so let this be a clarion call.
Yes. COVID-19, like other scourges, like other plagues, don't necessarily come along because we need a lesson in life. They come along because they come along. And while I think the plagues of God in Exodus were intentional to create a different way of looking at the world, I personally am not sure that COVID-19 is the same kind of outcome. But I do think it gives an opportunity to think about our lives and how to make our lives matter more and how to live this responsibility to be a force for good, to live with the freedom that gives us the power to make change in our lives and the world around us. Other thoughts? All right. So we only plan to study for an hour. I'm going to send you this this presentation so you can see it all. I want to get to one piece about the after this particular slide. Do you see where it says, "Where do we find the chutzpah"? You see that? So when we're done there, we're going to take a quick look at matzah. So we can think about our Seder table, however we're going to experience that today. And then we'll make some final remarks towards the end, okay? And I do appreciate your patience today. Yes, Cantor.
I am going to be hopping off for my next student, but thanks so much for letting me study with you all. Hag Sameach. Much love.
Sameach, thank you.
And
Was there a question?
Yeah, so Ben has shared with us in the chat that medical professionals are the Yad Hashem, or the hand of God.
Nice. That's a good point. Medical professionals are on the front lines of this plague, putting their lives on the line to make sure that we heal. They're first responders. They're people delivering Passover groceries. There are other interesting folks who are out there for whatever reason, are not at home, but are out there serving, making a difference, being a force for good, using their freedom to make a difference. All right, where do we find the chutzpah for all this? Let's see. Cassandra, will you read? Where do we find the chutzpah?
The Jews who remained Jews, who remained faithful to the historical character of the Exodus, continued to insist that the redemption could not be fully realized without social, political, and economic liberation, as well as spiritual fulfillment. Where does Israel get the strength, the chutzpah, to go on believing in redemption in a world that knows mass hunger and political exile and, I can't read that word, and boat people? How can Jews
Hang on. Where are you?
Boat people?
Yeah, that's what that means. That's literal.
How can Jews testify to hope and value when they have been continuously persecuted, hated, dispelled, destroyed? Out of the memory of the Exodus, so that you remember that the day that you went out of Egypt all the days of your life. The Jewish tradition takes this biblical ideal literally, but the more people comprehend the Exodus lessons of human value and love, the greater their pain in experiencing the exploitation routinely encountered in the world.
Right. So we remember the days of Egypt every day of our lives. And in this daily exercise, we come to a level of empathy, of compassion for those who are still living in exploitation. Now, the question is, how do we actually do that? Can you see this? How do we keep vibrant L'zecher leYetziat Mitzrayim?
We do.
All right. So there are a number of rituals that we do that remind us of this important concept and the compassion that this concept summons when we wrap tefillin, or we wear tzitzit. We're reminded of L'zecher leYetziat Mitzrayim, the laws of kashrut put us in connection. Daily prayer, we see we were slaves in the land of Egypt one way or another throughout. Shabbat is an opportunity for us to remember that we were also slaves in the land of Egypt. And of course, the Passover Seder is our reenactment of our freedom story. All right. So I'm going to just kind of speak fast here for the next 4 or 5 minutes to try and get us towards the end. Our Passover celebration seems a lot like ritual. Certainly, we're going to have matzah on our table. We're going to have bitter herbs. We're going to tell the story and do the rituals. But ultimately, the Passover celebration is not nearly as much about ritual as it is putting us in kind of psychological position to remember with conviction the Exodus and what happened in the Exodus. And one of the powerful understandings that we take away from our celebration is that the Exodus is not simply a history lesson, but it is a regular occurrence. And it repeats over and over again. And as such, it gives us direction. It says here that it never progresses. That may be true for many of us, but the notion that slavery never progresses, I think I would challenge, but the basis here is true. History is not a meaningless cycle, but the path along which the divine human partnership is operating to perfect the world. So now the reenactment comes in a number of different ways. Passover is the ultimate experience of the Exodus. If properly staged, Rabbi Greenberg says the Seder is the climax of liberation. There are any number of practices that help us get to that climax. And a couple of those practices have to do with chametz. This is leavening in grain products. And either we need to exclude the chametz or we need to eat the matzah, right? Matzah is unleavened bread, but it's made from similar things that we're not actually supposed to have on our table. In fact, let's see if I can find that. The bread of freedom. Let's skip ahead. Let me read this out loud to you. Matzah, two sides of an edible coin. Matzah was the food the Israelites took with them on the Exodus. They baked the dough which they took out of Egypt into unleavened cakes, matzot, for it was not leavened. Since they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves. Exodus 12, verse 39. Like the bitter herbs eaten at the Seder, it represents the degradation and suffering of the Israelites. Matzah is therefore both the bread of freedom and the erstwhile bread of slavery. It is not unusual for ex-slaves to invert the very symbols of slavery to express their rejection of the master's values. But there is a deeper meaning in the double-edged symbolism of matzah. It would have been easy to set up a stark dichotomy. Matzah is the bread of the Exodus way, the bread of freedom. Chametz is the bread eaten in the house of bondage in Egypt, or vice versa. Matzah is the hard ration slave food. Chametz is the rich, soft food to which free people treat themselves. That either or would be too simplistic. Freedom is in the psyche, not in the bread. Interesting that matzah and chametz, the leavened bread, can be seen as in tension with one another. We can also have a way of expressing our slave experience. Each of them reflects our slave experience and our freedom experience. Any questions or points of clarification before I move on? Is everybody clear that that our ancestors hurried to create matzah so that they could eat on the way out? They didn't have time for the bread to rise, right? So it was unleavened. And so that matzah can be seen as ultimately the freedom bread that they enjoyed as they are leaving Egypt. It could also be seen as the bread of affliction. Because they were slaves, they had to eat matzah. The question is it really most important to think about this literally? It's all about the bread, leavened or unleavened. Or is this more of a psychological issue? It's not so much the bread, but it's the attitude towards freedom that's most important. Reality is the matzah reminds us either way. It reminds us how bad slavery is. It reminds us how good freedom is. All right. Let us move ahead. I would say one last word here in the spirit of Rabbi Greenberg, that if freedom is a function of our psyche, then it means that when we eat matzah, we need to engage in an inward journey that enables us to think deeply about our own freedom, our own path to liberation. It is an internal journey. All right, let's move ahead. So tonight we will have matzah on our Seder plate, I hope. And the centerpiece of the Seder plate, the table rather, is the Seder plate. And on the Seder plate will be 3 pieces of matzot used at different times during the meal. Reading from Rabbi Greenberg, in a popular interpretation, these 3 pieces of matzot symbolize 3 kinds of Jews: Kohanim, the priests, the Levites, and Israelites. One of the tasks of a people seeking independence is to establish its unity of vision and purpose, as well as its unity in struggle. Slaves are set one against another. Some are totally subservient to the masters. Some try only to save themselves. Some try to break out. Jewish unity is as indispensable to survival now as it was then. The 3 types together symbolize the unity of fate of the Jewish people. So the matzah, again, reminds us of how we behave sometimes in slavery. Some will stand in the way of others. Some will remain subservient. But it also reminds us of the opportunities that we have in freedom. Right? That if we are unified, if we have a common vision, we will be a collective force for good. All right, let us conclude. Let's have 3 readers. We're just going to read these last pieces before we finish. Who hasn't read yet? Unmute yourself and in modern times. You see that? The redemption song rings powerfully.
This is Randy. I'll read it.
Great, Randy.
In modern times, the image of redemption has proven to be the most powerful of all. The rise of productivity and affluence has heightened expectations of the better life. Widely disseminated scientific ideas and conceptions of human freedom carry the same message. Do not accept disadvantage or suffering as your fate. Rather, let the world be transformed. These factors come together in a secular concept of redemption. By now, humans are so suffused with the vision of their own right to improvement, and any revolutionary spark sets off huge conflagrations. In a way, humane socialism is a secularized version of the Exodus's final triumph. The liberator is dialectical materialism, and the slaves are the proletariat. But the model and the end goal are the same. Indeed, directly revived images of the Exodus play as powerful a role as Marxism does in the worldwide revolutionary expectations. In South America, the theology of liberation directly touches the hundreds of millions who strive to overcome their poverty.
All right. so
Wow, that's a lot.
key phrase here is, yes, a lot in this. The key phrase is, do not accept disadvantage or suffering as your fate. Rather, let the world be transformed. That is the key lesson
Yes.
from the Exodus. Moving ahead, you see this? The Exodus is so much more than modern history or ancient history. Let's see. Rosalind, you want to read again?
Yes, I can't see the screen very well, but I will try.
Rosalind, maybe you can make it bigger.
It won't go. I only have a phone.
Oh, got it. Okay.
The secret of the impact of the Exodus is that it does not present itself as ancient history or one-time something I cannot see.
A one-time event.
Thank you. Since the key way to remember the Exodus is reenactment, the event offers itself as an ongoing experience in human history. As free people relive the Exodus, it turns memory into moral dynamic. The experience of slavery that breaks and crushes slaves does not destroy free people. It evokes feelings of repulsion and determination to help others to escape that state. As participants eat the bitter herb, they remember the heartbreaking tale and the death of the children. They remember that slavery gradually conditions people to accept servitude as the norm. The Israelites fell into that trap and were delivered, not by their own
merit.
The lesson is that a slave needs help to get started on liberation.
Right. So whether it's God or it's one another, we are morally dynamic creatures, and in enacting our freedom story or our slave story, however you look at it, it is to evoke in us the attitude, the intentionality to work for a freer world and to eliminate servitude wherever it may live. All right, let's look at two last slides. Power of family. Cassandra, you want to read that?
Sure.
Power of family, the power of community.
In the Seder ritual, the family also acts as the transmitter of memory. The past is not excised, but becomes an active part of the lives of the participants. Parents tell the story to children. At the same time, the children are not merely dependent. They ask questions and participate in the discussion. They must become involved, for it is essential that they join in the unfinished work of liberation. This is why, when Pharaoh offered to let the adult Jews leave Egypt to worship God if the children were left behind, Moses rejected the offer. With our youth and our elders, we will go. The Seder order is deliberately designed to hold the children's attention, to fascinate them with their people's history so that they will feel impelled to take up the covenantal task. Thus, by the magic of shared values and shared story, the Exodus is not some ancient event, however important. It is the ever-recurring redemption. It is the event from ancient times that is occurring tonight. It is the past and the future redemption of humanity.
So, whether we're talking about families passing on Jewish values through the Seder from older generations to younger generations, or we're talking about a communal setting, whether in person or online, we are imparting the values of our people to one another. Transmission is not simply a matter of family and the power of family, but the power of community, of sacred community, driven by this intentionality, this kavanah, to seek freedom and to ensure freedom. That is the power of the collective to make Passover so meaningful. Lastly, the Exodus is the most influential historical event of all time because it did not happen once, but recurs whenever people open up and enter into the event again. That's why we talked about it today. That's why we are celebrating in some fashion in the next day or two, online, in person. Yes, Cassandra.
So Ben just spoke to this in the chat. He says that we're supposed to speak of the Exodus as though we ourselves were liberated.
That is right. So it is not only a function of recurrence, from a calendar standpoint. The recurrence is deep within us. It's a function of our inner psyche, our understanding that we are not free until all are free, and so we remain slaves. We celebrate Passover as though we are slaves because others are not free. We might be free in many ways, but even we are in our freedom aren't completely free for this reason or that. And we know that there are those outside in the world, whether they're struggling with COVID-19 or having to put their lives on the line to make sure people don't get worse with COVID-19, or many of the other plagues that are affecting us internally, externally. We are not free, and so we have work to do. So I appreciate your time today. We will dedicate a little more time in the future to our intro classes, to accommodate for any technological glitches or many questions and wonderful comments. I hope you got something out of this experience. We'll continue to look at Rabbi Greenberg's work in the Jewish way. The next lesson we'll have will be in the near future. I'm not sure exactly what we'll focus on, but it will be one of the holy days that takes place in the spring. It could be a focus on Lag BaOmer. It could be before that. We could do a Yom HaShoah, Yom HaAtzmaut. He focuses on all these holy days, and then of course we'll do one for Shavuot for sure. And I hope that you will think about getting this book. I think it's a really great book called The Jewish Way. And anyway, let me stop sharing so I can see all of you who've remained with us. Aziz and Pesach to you, and lots of joy and wholeness this Passover season and always. And let us work to be more free for ourselves and for all the others that we share this planet with. So
Thank you.
thank you one and all. And we have a special Passover experience. It's sort of part service, part Seder, not so much an eating Seder, but a kind of a collaborating and getting together and focusing on what we might find in the Haggadah. And that's going to be on Saturday morning. Did I say Saturday? I meant Thursday morning at 10:30. So it's going to be live streamed. So what you want to do is go to the Emmanuel YouTube page. Okay, 10:30.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. And Zis and Pesach to one and all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Thank
Marcia.
you.
Gotta go.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Bye, Ben. See you. See you later. Go ahead and